Lonely Lumberjack purchased her for $2. She took the sack off and offered her body. The morning sun barely touched the tops of the trees when Jonah, the lumberjack, stepped out of his small wooden cabin. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet, and the only sounds were the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a crow. Jonah had lived here for more than 10 years, cutting trees, hauling logs, and making a simple life from the land. He had always chosen solitude, thinking it gave him freedom, but over time, the quiet had grown heavy. Some mornings, he found himself speaking out loud just to hear his own voice. He grabbed his worn coat and boots, pulling them on with practiced ease. The coat was old, patched in several places, and smelled faintly of pine and smoke. His boots had seen countless miles through mud, snow, and rocky paths, but they were sturdy and reliable, just like him. With his axe slung over his shoulder, Jonah started walking toward the small town nearby. The town was a short walk from the forest, a place he visited rarely, usually only for supplies or tools he couldn't make himself. As he walked along the dirt path, Jonah noticed the familiar sights: a small brook that gurgled over smooth stones, a row of birch trees that leaned toward the sun, and the distant hills that marked the edge of the forest. He liked the walk, even though he often felt out of place in the town. People there were busy, talking, laughing, and hurrying along their day, while he moved slowly, observing everything, yet feeling invisible. The town's market was bustling even in the early hours. Stalls lined the main street, and vendors shouted about their fresh produce, baked goods, and handmade items. Jonah wandered among them, nodding politely to familiar faces. He didn't talk much. Small talk had never been his strength. Instead, he enjoyed watching the variety of people, the colors of vegetables and flowers, and the little things that reminded him life outside the forest existed. That's when he saw it. In the corner of a small, crowded stall, partially hidden under a faded cloth, was something that caught his attention. At first, he couldn't tell what it was. It was small, oddly shaped, and seemed almost alive, though it didn't move. The stall owner, an elderly woman with a kind face and sharp eyes, noticed him staring. "Ah, you've spotted her," she said softly. "She's a special one." "Special?" he asked, though he wasn't sure what he was referring to. The woman smiled. "Yes. She doesn't cost much, just $2. But she's worth much more than that if you're the right person for her." Jonah looked at the little bundle again. It was covered with a coarse cloth, but he could sense something unusual about it, something that made his heart beat a little faster. He had no idea why, but he felt drawn to it. Normally he was careful with his money and choices, but something about this made him hesitate and then decide almost instinctively. "I'll take her," he said, fishing $2 from his pocket. The woman's eyes twinkled. "Good choice. Take care of her." Jonah took the bundle carefully, feeling its weight. It was heavier than he expected, yet not burdensome. He tucked it under his arm and made his way back to his cabin, trying not to jostle it too much. Every step felt strange. There was a mix of excitement and nervousness he hadn't felt in years. When he reached the cabin, he set the bundle down on his kitchen table. He stared at it for a long time, wondering what he had actually bought. The cloth was rough, and he hesitated to lift it at first, as if it held a secret too precious to reveal too quickly. He remembered the woman's words, her insistence that he must be the right person. Jonah didn't know what that meant, but he felt a responsibility suddenly resting on his shoulders. He took a deep breath and slowly untied the knot holding the cloth together. As he lifted it off, he held his breath, half expecting it to be ordinary, disappointing, something that would vanish the magic of the moment. But it wasn't. There she was. Jonah blinked in surprise. The small figure looked up at him with bright, curious eyes. She moved slightly, testing the space around her, and Jonah realized she was alive in a way that felt gentle and warm, but also clever, almost human in her understanding. Her fur glistened softly in the morning sunlight that filtered through the window, and her tiny movements had a grace that made Jonah smile without thinking. He laughed quietly to himself, a sound that felt strange in the empty cabin. "Well, I didn't expect this," he muttered. The creature, he hadn't yet decided on a name, approached him, sniffing his hand, then backing away cautiously as if measuring trust. Jonah knelt down, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He had spent so many years alone that he had forgotten how to connect with someone, or something, that depended on him. But this small being seemed eager to bridge the gap, ready to form a bond if he allowed it. He spent the next hour exploring her reactions, gently moving his hands, speaking softly. She chirped or squeaked in response, sometimes tilting her head, sometimes rubbing against him. Jonah found himself talking to her more than he had talked to any person in months. He told her about his morning walks, the heavy logs he carried, and the quiet of the forest. He shared stories he hadn't spoken aloud in years. The more he talked, the more she responded, and it felt as if the cabin, the forest, and even the air around him were alive with a new energy. Outside, the forest continued its morning routine, unaware of the small miracle taking place inside the cabin. Sunlight danced through the windows, catching dust particles that floated lazily in the air. Jonah looked around, noticing details he had ignored for years. The cracked windowsill, the rough grain of the wooden table, the familiar smell of pine and smoke mixing with something new, something sweet and alive. By noon, Jonah felt a strange happiness he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't the kind that came from achievement or money or recognition. It was quieter, steadier, deeper. A sense of connection, of being needed, of being able to care for another being that depended on him. He realized he hadn't just purchased something, he had invited change into his life. Something, or someone, had chosen him, and he, in turn, was ready to accept it. He named her Lila, a name that felt right the moment he said it. She chirped and moved closer, as if acknowledging the bond that had been silently forming all morning. Jonah smiled, feeling a warmth that spread from his chest to his fingertips. He realized the forest wasn't lonely anymore, and neither was he. The rest of the day passed in a blur of careful exploration. Jonah learned how Lila liked to eat, where she preferred to sit, and what made her curious. Every small discovery brought them closer together, each moment a thread weaving a new fabric of companionship and understanding. By evening, when the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, Jonah sat back in his chair and watched Lila settle into her little corner. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. Not just quiet peace, but the kind that comes from knowing life has more to offer than routine and survival. He realized that in buying her for just $2, he had gained something far more valuable, a friend, a companion, and a reminder that even in the loneliest places, life could surprise him. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Jonah leaned back, listening to the soft chirps and movements from Lila. He knew that tomorrow would bring more discoveries, more laughter, and more moments that made his heart lighter. For now, he simply smiled, feeling gratitude for the unexpected gift that had found its way into his solitary life. The next morning, sunlight poured through the cabin windows, casting warm golden beams on the wooden floor. Jonah woke to the sound of soft chirps and the gentle rustle of movement. Lila had been awake for hours, exploring her little corner of the cabin. Jonah stretched and rubbed his eyes, a smile already forming on his face. It was strange, he thought, how a small creature could make the quiet cabin feel so alive. He moved slowly, careful not to startle her. Lila chirped and hopped toward him as soon as she saw him, her tiny wings fluttering with excitement. Jonah laughed softly. "Good morning, Lila," he said, scratching behind her ears gently. She leaned into his hand, her small body vibrating with contentment. He had never felt this way before. Not with people, not with animals, not with anything. It was a new, strange happiness that made the world feel larger than the forest he had walked for years. After a simple breakfast of bread and coffee, Jonah decided it was time to take Lila outside. The forest was his world, and he wanted her to see it, to explore it safely under his watchful eye. He tied a small harness around her gently, making sure it was comfortable and secure. Lila chirped in protest at first, but Jonah cooed softly and assured her with calm words. Eventually she accepted it, hopping onto his shoulder as they stepped out of the cabin. The morning air was crisp, filled with the smell of pine and damp earth. Birds called to each other from the treetops, and the distant sound of a stream added a soft melody to the forest's rhythm. Jonah walked slowly, taking care to let Lila look around. She leaned forward eagerly, her tiny eyes wide with wonder. She chirped and squeaked as a squirrel darted across a tree branch, and Jonah laughed quietly. Her excitement was contagious. As they walked, Jonah noticed things he had overlooked for years. The way the sunlight made patterns through the leaves, the small mushrooms growing in hidden corners, the delicate footprints of deer in the mud. Lila's curiosity made him see the forest with new eyes. Every movement of hers, every tilt of her head, reminded him that life was full of small miracles. They came to a small clearing where wildflowers grew in patches of color, yellow, purple, and white. Jonah let Lila down carefully, and she hopped among the flowers, sniffing and chirping. He sat on a nearby log, watching her, feeling a deep sense of peace. The forest that had once felt empty now seemed full, alive, and inviting. He realized that Lila was more than just a companion. She was a bridge to the world he had shut himself away from for so long. As the day went on, Jonah showed Lila the stream that ran near the cabin. The water was clear and cold, and Lila dipped her tiny feet into it, chirping in delight. Jonah laughed and splashed his own hands in the water, feeling a childlike joy he hadn't known in years. He realized that small, simple pleasures could be the most fulfilling. Watching Lila explore made him feel young and free again. After the stream, they walked deeper into the forest. Jonah pointed out different trees, explaining their names and uses. He talked about the birds, the plants, and the tracks of animals. Lila listened in her way, sometimes chirping in response, sometimes hopping closer to him as if she understood every word. Jonah found himself talking more than he ever had with anyone. His words were no longer just sounds. They were shared moments, conversations between two beings who had found each other unexpectedly. Around midday, Jonah decided to rest near an old oak tree. He sat on the grass, leaning back against the rough bark, and Lila perched on his shoulder. The wind rustled the leaves above, and sunlight filtered through, creating moving patterns on the ground. Jonah closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth and peace sink in. He realized that for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. The cabin, the forest, and Lila had become a small world full of companionship and comfort. But the day was not without challenges. As they wandered near a fallen log, Lila spotted a small frightened rabbit hiding in the underbrush. She squeaked and hopped toward it instinctively. Jonah called out gently, "Careful, Lila. Don't scare it too much." Lila paused, looking back at him, and then slowly approached the rabbit with caution. Jonah watched, impressed by her curiosity balanced with care. The rabbit eventually darted away, and Lila chirped softly, seemingly proud of herself for being gentle. On their way back to the cabin, Jonah noticed that Lila was tired. He carried her gently, feeling her small body relax against him. He realized that she was trusting him completely, depending on him for safety and guidance. That trust was a responsibility he didn't take lightly. He thought about the years he had spent alone, how he had pushed people away, and how strange it felt to have someone, or something, rely on him so fully. Back at the cabin, Jonah prepared a small area for Lila with soft cloths and a little dish of water. He explored it with delight, hopping around and chirping in excitement. Jonah smiled, feeling a quiet happiness settle over him. He made a simple meal for himself, eating slowly while watching Lila explore her new home. The cabin felt warmer, brighter, and more alive than ever before. As evening approached, Jonah lit a small fire in the hearth. The flames flickered and danced, casting shadows on the wooden walls. Lila sat near the fire, her eyes reflecting the glow, and Jonah felt a deep sense of contentment. He realized that he had not only found companionship, but also a purpose. Caring for Lila, sharing his world with her, and protecting her brought a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced. That night, Jonah lay in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the cabin. Lila had curled up nearby, resting peacefully. Jonah thought about the market, the woman who had sold Lila to him, and the strange twist of fate that had brought her into his life. For just $2, he had purchased something far more valuable than he could have imagined, a friend, a companion, and a reminder that life had more to offer than solitude and routine. He drifted off to sleep with a smile, feeling the warmth of the fire and the gentle presence of Lila nearby. The forest outside remained quiet, but inside the cabin, life had begun anew. Jonah knew that tomorrow would bring more adventures, more discoveries, and more moments of joy. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, ready to face the world with his new companion by his side. The days that followed were filled with small routines and adventures. Jonah and Lila explored the forest together every morning, discovering hidden streams, climbing gentle hills, and observing the wildlife. Jonah began keeping a small journal, recording their experiences, noting Lila's curious behavior, and writing down the lessons he learned from his small friend. Each day brought new surprises, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. One afternoon, Jonah decided to show Lila the old abandoned cabin deeper in the forest. It had been empty for years, and he remembered playing there as a child. Lila hopped along eagerly, her tiny feet moving quickly over the moss-covered ground. Inside the cabin, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through broken windows. Jonah felt a wave of nostalgia, and Lila seemed to sense the importance of the place. She explored carefully, chirping softly as if acknowledging the history of the old structure. Jonah realized that Lila was teaching him to notice details he had long ignored. The shape of leaves, the sound of wind through broken shingles, the smell of damp wood. She made him slow down, observe, and appreciate. Life, he thought, was not just about survival or work. It was about noticing, feeling, and sharing moments of beauty. By the time they returned to their cabin, the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, reflecting off the forest like a living canvas. Jonah and Lila settled near the fire again, enjoying the warmth and quiet. Jonah reflected on the day, realizing that his life had changed in small, almost imperceptible ways. He laughed more, spoke more, and felt emotions he hadn't recognized in years. For Jonah, Lila was not just a companion. She was a teacher, a friend, and a source of joy. And as the stars appeared in the sky that night, he knew that their journey together had only just begun. The forest, once silent and empty, now resonated with life, laughter, and the quiet promise of new beginnings. The following morning, the forest was alive with sound. Birds chirped in harmony, the wind whispered through the trees, and the distant stream gurgled softly over smooth rocks. Jonah woke to the smell of fresh pine and the soft rustle of movement. Lila was already awake, hopping around the cabin in excitement. Her small wings fluttered as she explored every corner, inspecting things with a curiosity that never ceased to amaze him. Jonah smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. Every morning, waking up with Lila felt like a new beginning. He rubbed his eyes, stretched, and spoke softly. "Good morning, Lila. Ready for another adventure?" She chirped and hopped onto his shoulder as if answering yes. Jonah laughed quietly, feeling the lightness of joy that had been missing from his life for so long. After breakfast, Jonah decided they would explore a part of the forest he rarely visited, the old meadow near the hillside. It was a quiet place where wildflowers grew in abundance and deer sometimes grazed peacefully. The path was uneven, filled with roots and rocks, but Jonah moved carefully, keeping an eye on Lila. She hopped along beside him, occasionally flying a few feet ahead before returning, always staying close. As they walked, Jonah noticed small changes in himself. He felt lighter, more aware, and more connected to the world around him. Lila had awakened something in him, a patience, a wonder, and a willingness to experience life fully. Each chirp and movement of hers made him feel present, like he was no longer just surviving in the forest, but truly living. When they reached the meadow, the sight took Jonah's breath away. Sunlight streamed over the flowers, turning the field into a sea of colors. Yellow daisies, purple wildflowers, white clovers, and pink blooms he couldn't name. "Lila!" squeaked excitedly and hopped into the flowers, disappearing momentarily among the petals. Jonah laughed, watching her peek out, her bright eyes shining with curiosity and joy. He wandered through the meadow slowly, observing the small wonders, the tiny insects crawling over leaves, a butterfly landing gently on a flower, and the soft hum of bees collecting nectar. Lila followed closely, occasionally stopping to investigate a plant or chase a fluttering leaf. Jonah realized that life had been passing him by all these years while he focused only on work and survival. Now, with Lila, he noticed everything, the small details, the hidden beauties, and the quiet miracles of nature. But adventure was not always simple. As Jonah was kneeling to examine a small patch of moss, Lila squeaked loudly and flapped her wings nervously. Jonah looked up quickly and noticed a fox watching them from the edge of the meadow. Its eyes were sharp, alert, and curious. Jonah felt a twinge of concern, but also knew the fox was unlikely to harm Lila. He spoke calmly. "Easy, Lila. Stay close to me." Lila hopped onto his shoulder, trusting him completely. The fox watched them for a few moments before bounding away, disappearing into the forest. Lila chirped softly, as if she understood that the danger had passed. Jonah exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and pride. He realized that part of caring for Lila was being attentive, protective, and ready for the unexpected. In return, she taught him to stay calm, observant, and patient, reinforcing a bond that grew stronger every day. After the brief scare, Jonah decided to rest under a large oak tree at the edge of the meadow. He leaned back against the rough bark, closing his eyes as a gentle breeze passed over him. Lila hopped down, exploring the roots and small patches of grass. Jonah reached out, letting her sniff his hand, and felt a quiet connection that words could not describe. She was more than a companion. She had become a part of his daily life, his joy, and his heart. As the day went on, Jonah began to experiment with small games and exercises with Lila. He taught her to follow his hand, to respond to soft calls, and even to bring small items back to him. Each success was celebrated with chirps, soft laughs, and gentle pats. Jonah found himself learning patience and creativity, discovering skills he had never thought he possessed. Lila, in her own way, encouraged him to be playful, imaginative, and attentive. During one game, Jonah noticed something unusual near the edge of the meadow. A small, broken fence surrounded a tiny, overgrown garden. Curious, he approached carefully, with Lila hopping beside him. Inside, he saw the remnants of old plants. weeds overtaking the soil, and a small, neglected scarecrow leaning to one side. Something about the place called to him. He remembered stories of gardens his grandmother had kept, filled with flowers, vegetables, and fruit. He wondered who had tended this garden, why it had been abandoned, and what stories it held. Jonah decided that the garden needed care. He pulled out some weeds, cleared debris, and began marking the area for future planting. Lila chirped excitedly, hopping into the cleared spaces as if approving of his work. Jonah felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. Not only was he caring for Lila, but he was also beginning to care for the world around him in ways that brought beauty and life. As the sun climbed higher, Jonah and Lila continued their exploration, discovering a small stream that curved around the meadow. The water was clear and refreshing, perfect for drinking and playing. Jonah let Lila dip her feet in the cool water, and she squeaked joyfully, hopping in and out with delight. Jonah laughed, feeling a lightness in his heart that had been absent for a decade. The forest, the meadow, the small stream, they were no longer just places. They were a shared world, alive with connection and wonder. By mid-afternoon, Jonah noticed clouds gathering in the sky. A light rain began to fall, cooling the earth and filling the air with the scent of wet pine and soil. He decided it was time to head back to the cabin. Lila perched on his shoulder, chirping softly as the rain tapped the leaves above. Jonah moved carefully, mindful of slippery roots and rocks. Even in the rain, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that they faced the elements together. Back at the cabin, Jonah built a small shelter for Lila near the fire, keeping her warm and dry. She chirped softly, moving in circles to dry off and settle in. Jonah prepared his own meal and sat quietly, reflecting on the day. He realized that every moment with Lila had brought him lessons, laughter, and a renewed sense of life. The small challenges, like the fox in the rain, were reminders of responsibility, care, and trust. As evening fell, Jonah stepped outside briefly to observe the sunset. The sky was a canvas of orange, pink, and purple, fading slowly into the deep blue of night. Stars began to appear, twinkling above the forest like distant lanterns. Lila perched near the door, chirping softly, as if admiring the view. Jonah smiled, feeling gratitude for the unexpected turn of events that had brought her into his life. That night, as Jonah lay in bed, he thought about the days ahead. He imagined exploring new parts of the forest, discovering hidden wonders, and continuing to strengthen the bond with Lila. The thought filled him with hope and excitement. For years, he had lived in solitude, thinking that was the life he wanted. But now, he understood that connection, trust, and care were what made life truly meaningful. Before sleep took him, Jonah whispered softly to Lila, "Tomorrow, we'll have another adventure. Just you and me," Lila chirped in response, curling up nearby. Jonah closed his eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of her tiny movements and the warmth of the cabin. Life was no longer quiet and lonely. It was alive, full of discovery, and shared with someone who had brought light to his world. Over the next few days, Jonah and Lila settled into a comforting routine. Every morning brought new explorations, climbing small hills, observing the animals of the forest, and finding hidden nooks filled with wildflowers. Jonah began keeping a small sketchbook, drawing the places they visited and noting Lila's behavior. He found joy in the small victories, like when Lila learned to follow simple directions or responded to his gentle calls. Each day reinforced their growing connection, a bond built on trust, care, and shared curiosity. Jonah also began noticing the emotional changes in himself. He laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and even began to imagine inviting neighbors over for small visits, something he hadn't considered in years. Lila had awakened a sense of community and openness he thought he had lost forever. Her presence reminded him that life was meant to be experienced fully, with attention, care, and joy in every small moment. One afternoon, while resting by the stream, Jonah noticed a pair of deer grazing nearby. He motioned for Lila to stay close, and she chirped softly, observing the deer with fascination. Jonah felt a sense of wonder, realizing that these small experiences, shared with Lila, made him feel connected to the larger world. Life was no longer about just survival. It was about noticing, appreciating, and participating in the beauty around him. As the sun set behind the trees, Jonah and Lila returned to the cabin. The forest was quiet, filled with the soft sounds of night creatures and the gentle rustle of leaves. Jonah lit a small fire, and they settled near it, sharing the warmth and comfort of home. He reflected on their adventures, feeling grateful for the companionship, joy, and lessons that Lila had brought into his life. The night ended with a sense of peace and anticipation. Jonah knew that their journey had only just begun. Together, they would continue exploring, learning, and growing. Two friends discovering the wonders of the world and the depth of connection that made life meaningful. The morning air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth from the night's rain. Jonah woke with a feeling of anticipation. Lila had already been moving around the cabin, hopping onto shelves and chirping softly as if to say, "Good morning." Jonah smiled as he stretched, noticing the way the sunlight fell across her tiny body, making her feathers shine like gold. Today, Jonah had decided to explore a part of the forest he had never ventured into before. He had heard from a passing neighbor that the forest extended beyond the hills, leading to a small valley where wildflowers bloomed even in late summer. It was a place few people visited, and Jonah had always been curious. With Lila perched on his shoulder, he felt ready for whatever the forest might offer. They set off along a narrow path, the forest growing denser as they walked. The trees were taller here, their branches forming a thick canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft, dancing patterns on the forest floor. Jonah moved carefully, stepping over roots and small streams, while Lila hopped and fluttered around him, exploring every nook and cranny. The further they went, the quieter the forest became, the usual sounds of birds and insects replaced by a soft, mysterious hum of nature. After about an hour of walking, they reached a small clearing where the valley opened up. The view took Jonah's breath away. Wildflowers of every color stretched as far as the eye could see, mixed with tall grasses that swayed gently in the wind. A small brook ran through the center, sparkling in the sunlight. Jonah set Lila down, letting her hop among the flowers. She chirped excitedly, chasing butterflies and exploring the soft earth. Jonah sat on a nearby rock, watching her with a sense of wonder. As he rested, Jonah noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The wind picked up, rustling the flowers and trees with a gentle urgency. Jonah realized that a storm was approaching. He called Lila to him, and she returned quickly, chirping softly as if sensing the change in the weather. Jonah looked around, assessing the area. There was no shelter nearby, and the valley, beautiful as it was, offered little protection from the coming rain. Thinking quickly, Jonah remembered an old hollow tree he had passed on the way in. It was large enough to provide temporary shelter for him and Lila. He scooped her up and ran, the ground slippery from recent rainfall. Lila chirped nervously but stayed close, trusting him completely. Jonah's heart raced, not from fear but from the responsibility he felt. He had to get them both to safety. They reached the hollow tree just as the first drops of rain began to fall. Jonah set Lila down carefully inside, and she nestled into a small corner, chirping softly. Jonah took a moment to catch his breath, feeling grateful that they had made it in time. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the hollow tree and turning the valley into a blur of gray and green. Jonah listened to the sound, feeling a mix of awe and caution. Nature, beautiful as it was, could also be unpredictable. While waiting for the storm to pass, Jonah explored the hollow tree. It was larger than he expected, with a dry floor covered in fallen leaves. He arranged a small area for Lila, making her comfortable with pieces of cloth and a tiny dish of water he had brought. She chirped softly, hopping around to explore the new space. Jonah smiled, feeling a sense of pride in his ability to provide safety and care. The storm lasted for several hours. Jonah sat quietly, watching Lila as she explored the hollow tree. He realized that this challenge had strengthened their bond. Lila trusted him completely, and he had risen to the occasion, protecting and guiding her through uncertainty. He reflected on the journey they had taken together, the small adventures, the discoveries, and the lessons learned. Each moment had brought them closer, creating a connection that felt unbreakable. As the rain finally eased and the clouds began to part, Jonah decided it was time to head back to the cabin. The valley had become muddy and slippery, but Jonah moved carefully, holding Lila close. She chirped softly, her tiny wings brushing against his chest. Jonah smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The challenge of the storm had been a test of patience, courage, and trust, and they had passed it together. On the way back, they encountered a fallen tree blocking the path. Jonah assessed it and realized it would take some effort to move. He rolled up his sleeves and began working, using his strength and experience as a lumberjack to shift the branches and clear the way. Lila helped in her own small way, hopping on the branches, exploring the area, and chirping encouragingly. Jonah laughed quietly, appreciating her presence even in such a practical task. Once the path was clear, they continued their journey. The forest seemed different after the storm, refreshed and alive. The leaves glistened with raindrops, the earth smelled rich and clean, and the streams flowed more vibrantly than before. Jonah felt a renewed connection to the forest, understanding that challenges and obstacles were part of the beauty and rhythm of life. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting, casting warm golden light through the trees. Jonah and Lila entered the cabin, shaking off mud and arranging their small space. Lila hopped around, exploring and chirping softly, while Jonah prepared a simple meal. He thought about the day, realizing how much they had both grown. The storm had tested their patience and resilience, and they had emerged stronger and closer than ever. That evening, Jonah decided to start a small project. He gathered some old logs and branches from the cabin's yard and began building a tiny shelter near the cabin for Lila. She watched eagerly, chirping and hopping around, occasionally offering small pieces of straw or cloth. Jonah laughed quietly, feeling a sense of joy in creating something for someone he cared about. The project gave him purpose and focus, and he felt the satisfaction of building something meaningful with his own hands. As night fell, Jonah and Lila settled near the fire. The warmth of the flames and the soft glow of the cabin created a peaceful atmosphere. Jonah reflected on the lessons of the day: trust, resilience, patience, and care. Lila had taught him to see the world with fresh eyes, to embrace challenges, and to find joy in the smallest moments. She had become more than a companion. She was a teacher, a friend, and a part of his heart. Before going to sleep, Jonah whispered softly to Lila, "Tomorrow will bring new adventures. We'll face them together, no matter what comes our way." Lila chirped in response, hopping onto his shoulder and nuzzling against him. Jonah smiled, feeling a sense of peace and anticipation. Life had changed in ways he could never have imagined, all because of a small creature he had purchased for $2. The days that followed continued to bring discovery and growth. Jonah and Lila explored new parts of the forest, observed the changing seasons, and met occasional neighbors who marveled at the bond they shared. Jonah found himself laughing more, speaking more, and opening his heart in ways he hadn't thought possible. Lila had transformed his world, bringing light, curiosity, and love into his once lonely life. One afternoon, Jonah decided to expand the small garden they had discovered earlier. He planted seeds for wildflowers, carefully arranging them so they would grow in patterns that Lila could explore safely. She chirped excitedly, hopping between the flowers and investigating each new sprout. Jonah felt a sense of accomplishment and pride. Together, they were creating life, nurturing beauty and strengthening their bond through shared effort and care. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Jonah and Lila sat near the fire. The forest around them was quiet, alive with the gentle sounds of night creatures. Jonah reflected on the journey they had taken together. From the moment he purchased her for $2 to the adventures, challenges, and growth they had shared, life, he realized, was not about solitude or survival alone. It was about connection, care, and the joy of sharing experiences with someone who mattered. Lila hopped onto his shoulder, chirping softly as if acknowledging his thoughts. Jonah smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and love. The forest, the cabin, and the small adventures had become a shared world, full of discovery, trust, and happiness. For the first time in years, Jonah felt truly alive, ready to embrace the future with his small, bright companion by his side. As night fell and the stars twinkled above, Jonah and Lila slept peacefully, safe, warm, and connected. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and new opportunities to grow together. But for now, they rested, knowing that the bond they shared was strong, unbreakable, and full of promise. The world was no longer lonely. It was full of life, adventure, and love, all because of the small creature who had transformed Jonah's life in ways he could never have imagined. And the morning sun peeked over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the forest. Jonah awoke with a sense of quiet anticipation, stretching his arms and smiling as he saw Lila already moving around the cabin. She chirped softly, hopping onto the windowsill to watch the world outside. Jonah laughed quietly, feeling the warmth in his chest that had become familiar over the past weeks. Life had changed in ways he could never have imagined, all because of a small creature he had once purchased for just $2. After breakfast, Jonah decided to take Lila on a gentle walk through the forest, revisiting some of their favorite spots. They started with the small meadow where the wildflowers grew in vibrant colors. Lila hopped around eagerly, sniffing the flowers and chasing butterflies, her tiny wings fluttering in excitement. Jonah walked slowly, observing her joy, and realized how much he had learned from her presence. She had taught him to notice the little things, to be patient, and to find happiness in simple moments. As they wandered, Jonah noticed that the forest had changed subtly. The storm from days before had left the trees glistening with fresh leaves, and the streams flowed more vibrantly, reflecting the sunlight in sparkling patterns. Jonah felt a deep sense of connection to the forest, as if it too had been transformed by their adventures. He realized that life was not just about surviving or working. It was about appreciating, participating, and sharing experiences with those who mattered. When they reached the old hollow tree, Jonah paused to rest. Lila hopped down, exploring the roots and small patches of grass. Jonah leaned back against the tree, closing his eyes for a moment and listening to the sounds of the forest. Birds chirped in the distance, the wind rustled through the branches, and the gentle gurgle of a nearby stream created a peaceful melody. He thought about the journey they had taken together, from the moment he first saw Lila at the market to the adventures, challenges, and lessons they had shared. Jonah opened his eyes and watched Lila closely. She had grown more confident and curious, hopping and chirping without hesitation. Her presence reminded him of the importance of trust and companionship. He realized that they had formed a bond that went beyond mere friendship. It was a connection built on care, patience, and shared experiences. Lila had become a teacher, showing him how to embrace life fully, even in the smallest moments. After a while, Jonah decided to visit the small garden they had begun to cultivate together. The flowers were blooming beautifully, their colors bright and cheerful. Jonah knelt down, examining the plants and making small adjustments to ensure they grew well. Lila chirped happily, hopping among the flowers and investigating each new sprout. Jonah smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment and pride. Together they had created something alive, something that reflected their shared care and attention. As the day went on, Jonah and Lila explored a hidden path that led to a small waterfall. The sound of rushing water filled the air, and the sunlight created a rainbow in the mist. Lila hopped from rock to rock, chirping in delight, while Jonah followed carefully, holding her close whenever the footing was tricky. He marveled at the beauty of the place and felt grateful for the moments they shared. The waterfall became a symbol for him, a reminder that life, like water, flowed continuously, full of energy and change. While resting near the waterfall, Jonah thought about the lessons he had learned from Lila. She had taught him patience, curiosity, and the value of observing the world with care. She had shown him how to face challenges calmly, how to embrace uncertainty, and how to celebrate small victories. Jonah realized that her presence had transformed him, helping him grow emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. He felt a sense of gratitude that he could hardly put into words. On the way back to the cabin, Jonah noticed an older neighbor tending to a small plot of land near the edge of the forest. Jonah had often kept to himself, but today he felt inspired to engage. He waved, and the neighbor smiled warmly, inviting him to come closer. Jonah introduced Lila, and the neighbor chuckled at her curious movements and bright eyes. They talked for a while, sharing stories about the forest, the plants, and the small joys of daily life. Jonah felt a sense of connection to the community, something he had avoided for many years. Lila had brought him not only companionship, but also the courage to reach out and form bonds with others. Back at the cabin, Jonah decided to make a small gift for Lila, a cozy nest in a corner of the room filled with soft cloths and small twigs. He carefully arranged it, making sure it was comfortable and safe. Lila explored it eagerly, chirping softly and hopping in and out, testing the space. Jonah watched her with a smile, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He realized that care and love were not measured by grand gestures, but by small acts of attention and thoughtfulness. As the sun began to set, casting warm orange and pink hues across the forest, Jonah and Lila settled near the fire. Jonah reflected on their journey, thinking about all the moments that had shaped their bond. The initial purchase at the market, the meadow explorations, the storm, the hidden valley, and the garden they had nurtured together. Each moment had strengthened their connection and taught him valuable lessons about life, trust, and joy. Jonah spoke softly to Lila, recounting their adventures in detail. She chirped in response, hopping onto his shoulder and nuzzling against him. Jonah laughed quietly, feeling a sense of companionship he had never experienced before. The cabin, once quiet and lonely, now resonated with warmth, laughter, and shared memories. He realized that life had become richer, fuller, and more meaningful because of her presence. That night, as Jonah lay in bed with Lila perched nearby, he reflected on the future. He imagined more adventures, more discoveries, and more shared moments. The forest, the cabin, and the small wonders of life had become a canvas for their journey together. Jonah knew that challenges would come, but with Lila by his side, he felt ready to face them with patience, courage, and joy. Jonah and Lila explored new trails, discovered hidden groves, and observed the changing seasons with curiosity and wonder. Lila grew more confident, hopping further, exploring more, and responding to Jonah's gentle guidance. Jonah, in turn, learned to be patient, to notice details he had overlooked for years, and to find joy in the smallest aspects of daily life. Their bond continued to strengthen, built on trust, care, and shared discovery. Jonah also began documenting their adventures in a small journal. He wrote about the places they visited, the lessons they learned, and the moments that brought them joy. Lila seemed to enjoy the ritual, chirping softly as Jonah wrote, occasionally hopping onto the pages as if offering her approval. The journal became a symbol of their journey, a way to capture the beauty, learning, and connection they shared. One morning, Jonah decided to invite a few neighbors for a small visit. He had grown more comfortable with human interaction thanks to Lila's influence. The neighbors were delighted to meet Lila, marveling at her bright eyes, curious movements, and playful personality. Jonah shared stories of their adventures, and everyone laughed and enjoyed the tales. He realized that his life had expanded beyond the forest, cabin, and garden. He had reconnected with the community, forming bonds he had long avoided. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between Jonah and Lila deepened further. They had grown together, learning from each other and sharing countless moments of joy, curiosity, and reflection. Jonah had discovered a new understanding of companionship, trust, and the importance of small gestures of care. Lila had taught him to embrace life fully, notice the beauty around him, and find happiness in the present moment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jonah sat on the porch of his cabin with Lila perched on his shoulder. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting the peace and contentment he felt. He looked at Lila, her bright eyes shining in the fading light, and whispered softly, "You've changed my life, little one. I never knew how much I needed you." Lila chirped in response, nuzzling against him gently. Jonah smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The cabin, the forest, and the life he had built were no longer solitary or empty. They were alive with connection, companionship, and shared experiences. He realized that happiness was not something to seek far away. It was found in trust, care, and the simple moments shared with someone who mattered. That night, as the stars appeared in the sky and the forest settled into quiet, Jonah and Lila slept peacefully. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of home, and the strength of their bond filled the cabin. Life had become richer, fuller, and more meaningful because of their journey together. Jonah knew that the adventures were far from over, but he felt ready, knowing that with Lila by his side, every challenge and every discovery would be shared and cherished. The next morning, Jonah woke with a renewed sense of purpose. He stretched, looked at Lila, and felt a wave of gratitude. Together, they had faced storms, explored hidden valleys, nurtured gardens, and formed a bond that could not be broken. The forest, once silent and empty, was now a world full of life, joy, and wonder. And in that world, Jonah and Lila would continue to explore, learn, and grow. Two friends whose connection had transformed their lives forever. Jonah understood something important. Life was not measured by wealth, possessions, or solitary accomplishments. True happiness came from connection, care, and shared experiences. Lila had taught him this in countless ways, through trust, playfulness, and gentle companionship, and in return, Jonah had given her safety, guidance, and love. Together, they had created a life filled with meaning, adventure, and joy. As the sun rose higher, casting light across the forest, Jonah and Lila set off for another day of exploration. The path ahead was unknown, filled with possibilities and discoveries waiting to be made, but Jonah felt ready. He had found companionship, trust, and a renewed appreciation for life, and as long as Lila was by his side, he knew that every day would bring new moments of wonder, happiness, and connection.